Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94, back with another reaction video. Today, we're finna react to how Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan ruined TNA. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Most definitely, Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan ruined TNA, but let's get right into it, though.
By 2008, TNA was finally gathering momentum.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 2008, 2009 TNA was prime TNA. 2010, I want to say TNA from like 07 to 09 was really good. Yeah, like 2010 and onward, just I was TNA was such a fucking disappointment.
Had a unique product showcasing a six-sided ring and the high-flying X division, and talents like AJ Styles and Samoa Joe were becoming household names amongst fans. TNA had a seriously deep roster of former WWE superstars too, and their fan base was growing all around the world. Everything seemed to be in place for a breakthrough, and then they signed Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff just 4 years later, and the men would leave the company in a far worse state than when they arrived. TNA Wrestling was founded in 2002 by Jeff and Jerry Jarrett to fill the void left by the closure of WCW and ECW. The unique selling point of this new promotion was a weekly pay-per-view model, but despite a talented roster, they soon started to struggle. It proved difficult for them to build an audience when fans had to pay $9.99 each week in order to keep up with the show. Production quality issues made the shows look less polished compared to WWE, and fans could just watch Raw and SmackDown for free each week. Everyone expected the place to go out of business. That was until Panda Energy stepped in and purchased 72% of the company, and it became a family business with Dixie Carter running things backstage. With Panda's support, TNA moved away from the weekly pay-per-view model and got a show on Spike TV in 2005. They signed major former WWE superstars and started touring internationally, but things were still far from perfect. Dixie was proving to be a poor leader backstage. She lacked experience when it came to running a wrestling business, and she was struggling to book the show and keep her staff under control. The turmoil behind the scenes started to affect the on-screen product. The pay-per-views were badly promoted and the matches often featured screwy finishes, and despite TNA turning a small profit, the fans were still not satisfied. Something had to be done, and Dixie thought that signing Hulk Hogan was the solution.
The worst thing she could have did.
Was expected to elevate the entire
The
brand
worst
and
thing she could have did.
More fans to the product, and the deal on the table was fantastic for the Hulkster too, as he would be getting paid $35,000 per appearance. According to Eric Bischoff, he negotiated that contract on behalf of Hogan, and after making that kind of deal, you can see why Hogan wanted Bischoff by his side in TNA. Dixie had no interest in bringing Bischoff in, but Hogan insisted. Hogan sat Dixie down and explained to her that Bischoff was the visionary behind WCW's turnaround in the mid-90s, and that with his star power and Bischoff's creative vision, they could easily put WWE out of business. And so the deal was done. On October the 27th, 2009, during a press conference at Madison Square Garden, Hulk Hogan announced that he and Eric Bischoff had signed with TNA. During the presentation, Dixie Carter said, "Our goal is to become the world's biggest professional wrestling company. Hulk defines professional wrestling, and we look forward to partnering with him in a variety of ways as we continue to grow TNA globally."
Little did she know.
Executive producer was felt immediately. He argued that the six-sided ring was just a gimmick and it made TNA look like a joke. He said that people flipping the channel wouldn't recognise it as a wrestling show unless it was in a four-sided ring. Much of the fan base were immediately up in arms about the decision. To them, it was one of the things that made...
Well, learning that the six-sided ring wasn't really good for the wrestlers themselves, I can't complain, but this is what made TNA, the six-sided ring. But after hearing about the ropes and how hard they were, and how you had to like really how really stiff the mat was, how stiff it was, and how you had to find certain spots to do certain type of moves because you didn't want to hurt yourself or hurt anybody else in that ring, it's kind of understandable to go back to the regular ring. So it kind of makes sense. I'm not really mad per se at I can't say that I'm really mad that they got rid of it if it was causing a lot of problems for the wrestlers. So you want the wrestlers to not get hurt or to perform at their best. But I can't deny that 6-sided ring was what made TNA so fucking legendary. But like I said, a lot of wrestlers did complain that 6-sided ring shit was just not it. So I can't complain if the wrestlers are telling us like, yo, we really couldn't really do what we wanted to do in that 6-sided ring.
TNA feel unique and special, but there were bigger changes coming to TNA at the hands of its new executive producer. Bischoff had come close to beating WWE back in the 90s when he was running WCW, but ultimately he was beaten by Vince McMahon in the Monday Night Wars and WCW was put out of business. But now Bischoff saw an opportunity to get his own back. Bischoff, Hogan and Dixie Carter sat down with the executives at Spike TV and convinced them to give TNA a live Monday night show going head to head with WWE Raw.
That was the dumbest decision ever. That backfired so fucking bad. I think this shit only lasted like what, 4 months, and then they just stayed up. I remember this was like a 3-4 month experiment, and then Spike was just like, no, push it back to where it was. No, we're not doing that. No, because the ratings were so fucking bad. It wasn't even close. TNA was nowhere near WWE ratings at all. It actually hurt them in the long run.
Fans were left baffled and scratching their heads, wondering how two of the supposedly brightest minds in wrestling and Dixie Carter could have come up with such a stupid decision. It must have been one heck of a persuasive sales pitch. Spike TV agreed to a special live episode of Impact on Monday, January the 4th, 2010, which would herald the on-screen debut of the Hulkster. The promotion for the show went through the roof, with TNA spending an absolute fortune on advertising, but before Hogan had even stepped foot in the Impact Zone, it became apparent that he was up to his old tricks. As the show came on the air, Mike Tenay and Taz welcomed their new broadcast partner to the company, Bubba the Love Sponge. Bubba was a radio DJ of the shock jock variety from Florida. He and Hogan were longtime friends, and Hogan got him on the TNA payroll as soon as possible. The fans hated having Bubba on the show, and it was an early sign that Hogan was only out to exploit the company for his own gains. In January 2010, he made some disgusting comments about the Haiti earthquake that killed 220,000 people, and it was reported at the time that the wrestlers backstage despised Bubba and couldn't believe that he'd managed to hold on to his job. Awesome Kong took issue with his comments and punched him in the face twice backstage, and yet TNA continued to employ him. Kong ended up quitting the company because of it. It was a clear sign of the metaphorical chokehold that Hogan had on Dixie Carter, and Bubba the Love Sponge wasn't the only one of Hogan's buddies to get a job in TNA. As Hogan strolled down to the ring on the first live episode of Impact, Scott Hall and Sean Waltman were shown at ringside. When Hogan started cutting his promo, Hall interrupted. Now, when me and Pac heard that Eazy-E was here, that Hulk Hogan was going to be here, and Big Kevin Nash has been here, that means one thing to us: big paychecks, big sold-out arenas, and big parties. As we all started getting flashbacks to WCW and the inmates taking over the asylum, the Hulkster snapped us all back into reality. He assured everyone that this time, things were going to be different. TNA was going to become the #1 company in the world. But we should have known better back then, that you can never trust a word that comes out of Hogan's mouth.
Not at all.
In fact, it was almost insulting how Hogan didn't even try and hide his nepotism, and he'd already brought in Bubba, Scott Hall and Sean Waltman, but he still wasn't done for the evening. Bischoff showed up, who had no reason to be on TV, as an executive producer, and everyone had just assumed that he was going to be working backstage for TNA and not as an on-screen personality. And then Hogan's nepotism became literal as they showed his own daughter, Brooke, sat at ringside. And just to ruin everyone's night, the Nasty Boys made their TNA debut. These two fat slobs were barely relevant in the 90s, but they ended up on the gravy train too, just because they were a couple of Hogan's best friends. I'm surprised Brutus didn't show up somewhere. The special live episode of Impact drew a 1.5 rating, while Raw, on the other side, scored a rating of 3.7. But
not even
TNA's
close.
performance was enough to convince Spike TV to allow Impact to go head-to-head with Raw.
It wasn't
Monday
even
night,
close.
Starting in March 2010. And sadly, this wasn't Brooke Hogan's only appearance in TNA, and she was announced as the head of the Knockouts division, a role that she had absolutely no right to play. And it was just blatant nepotism on behalf of Hogan. But Hogan had an ulterior motive in getting the kid on TV, and that was to promote her awful music career that nobody was interested in. Brooke was involved in a storyline with the Aces and Eights where she played Bully Ray's love interest. Her acting was better in Hogan Knows Best, and that's not a compliment. The Aces and Eights was a biker faction who were inspired by the Sons of Anarchy TV show. It was one of Eric Bischoff's attempts to copy the NWO in WCW, and to begin with, it looked like a promising storyline. What made them so interesting to begin with was their identities were actually hidden, and fans were surprised to find out who was underneath the balaclavas. But it was a case of diminishing returns, and each reveal was more disappointing than the last. And when Garrett Bischoff was revealed to be one of the members, it was game over. Of course, Eric couldn't help himself but take a leaf out of Hogan's playbook and got his own son on the TNA payroll. This dweeb stunk up TNA for years, and he wouldn't have been anywhere near a TV-based wrestling show if it wasn't for his daddy. We even had to put up with a Bischoff versus Bischoff match on pay-per-view at one point. The Aces and Eights was actually Bischoff's third attempt at emulating the NWO, with the band being his first try. Kevin Nash, Scott Hall and Sean Waltman attempted to run riot like it was 1997 all over again, but all it proved was that Bischoff was a one-trick pony when it came to running a wrestling promotion. Original NWO member Hulk Hogan stayed away from the band, telling everyone that things were different now, but that all went out of the window at Bound for Glory in October 2010, when just like back in 1996, Hogan and Bischoff turned heel and formed Immortal. This was Bischoff's next attempt at recreating the NWO. The only highlight here was Jeff Hardy's brilliant heel run, which came out of nowhere. During his time in Immortal, Eric became the evil on-screen authority figure in yet another WCW flashback. He concocted a storyline where he declared war on the high-flying X Division. For years, the X Division was one of the few things that TNA did better than WWE. Even when the chips were down, fans could look forward to their version of the Cruiserweights putting on a spectacular show. But Bischoff managed to make the division look pathetic by belittling its roster every week and then by booking the Monster Abyss to win the title. He also introduced
ruined everything. Yeah, I tuned out after this point. At this point, I tuned out. Like, the Jeff Hardy thing was definitely interesting to see him as a heel. It was definitely interesting, but with them destroying the X Division the way they did, bro, I kind of just saw the writing on the wall, and I just said, fuck it. I'd rather just stay with the basic, boring product known as WWE. You got John Cena running wild. You got Randy Orton beating the shit out of everybody every fucking week. Then Triple H and Shawn Michaels normally come back into the fray, and D-Generation X always forms up again. I was like, it was getting typical over there too, but their typical was what's the word I'm looking for? Their typical was more, WWE's typical bullshit was more like tolerable than what TNA was doing. What TNA was they were just destroying everything that made them great. Like, everything that was great about TNA was just ruined.
Fortune, which was a Four Horsemen knockoff featuring Ric Flair himself. Eric didn't just manage to make a mess of the creative side of TNA, he also wrecked the production side of things too. His master plan of going head-to-head with Raw every Monday night was a total disaster. Despite WWE suffering from its lowest ratings in history at the time, this was still a monumentally dumb idea and proved that Bischoff just had no fresh ideas at all. From March 2010, Impact got battered in the ratings every week by going head-to-head with WWE before mercifully being put out of its misery and moved back to Thursdays. In a statement, Dixie Carter said, "Our fans made it clear that they preferred the Thursday night time period. We're looking forward to delivering what the fans are asking for." They tried to dress it up, but the damage was done. The company already looked second-rate compared to WWE, but now they were second-rate and being laughed at. Bischoff also insisted that Impact went live every other episode, and then they left the soundstage at Universal Studios and went on tour, all of which cost them an absolute fortune. They hardly ever managed to sell out any of the arenas they visited, even for the pay-per-views. They were renting out all of these huge arenas across the United States and only selling a few thousand tickets, which was terrible business practice. The pay-per-view buy rate also plummeted during Eric Bischoff's tenure as executive producer. For example, the 2010 edition of Bound for Glory did around 40,000 buys on pay-per-view, whereas the 2011 show did just 25,000 buys. Compare this to WWE, they drew 180,000 buys for the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view in the same month, and things weren't much better on TV. In November 2012, Impact's TV rating was down 21% on the previous year, and they were barely achieving 1 million viewers a week. And no wonder, because the storylines were crap. The Claire Lynch storyline was an embarrassment involving AJ Styles, who was accused of having an affair with Dixie Carter and fathering a child with a drug-addicted woman named Claire Lynch. Lynch was portrayed by an actress who couldn't act, by the way, and the whole angle just dragged on endlessly. Bischoff took credit for this idea, by the way, and later said that he loved it. Obviously, the fans hated every second of it. And like that wasn't bad enough, the constant presence of Hulk Hogan turned even more fans off. He inserted himself in the never-ending Aces and Eights storyline, where he took on Bully Ray, who was having an affair with Brooke Hogan or some other crap. There were some rumblings that TNA was starting to struggle financially under the weight of all of these bad decisions. In October 2013, Hogan made his last appearance in the company, and then a few months later, TNA sent Bischoff home in order to finish out the rest of his contract. Just 10 days after Bischoff's departure, TNA licked its wounds and headed back to the soundstage at Universal Studios. They even eventually went back to the six-sided ring, but sadly it was too little too late for Spike TV. They cancelled TNA Impact in July 2014. In the disastrous years that he was the executive producer of TNA, Eric Bischoff proved that he was just a one-trick pony. Apart from inflicting his useless son on the roster, he did nothing new. Lazily, he just went back to his WCW playbook, and this time around, none of it worked. And of course it proved that the mere presence of Hulk Hogan isn't enough to save a wrestling company, and both men turned out to be nothing more than snake oil salesmen. Truly, TNA never recovered from this period, and it certainly never got back to the promising heights that it achieved in 2008 before the arrival of Hogan and Bischoff.
Not at all, man. Fuck Eric Bischoff. Fuck Hulk Hogan. Why did TNA go with these niggas, bro? It just didn't make sense, bro. It was WCW 2000 all over again. Oh, it was just the worst of times all over again, man. Like I really gave up on TNA after that. Like once they destroyed the X division, bro, and all the good things about the company just started going downhill, and I just saw the writing on the wall. I just stuck with WWE, and I haven't looked at other companies since. That's why I can't look at AEW the way that I can't look at AEW the way how a regular wrestling fan would look at it, because of what TNA did. TNA was a breath of fresh air away from WWE, for me personally. Now, I got into wrestling by watching WCW, but the WWE characters were just way better. They were just way better in my personal opinion. The NWO wasn't really cool to me at all. Like, they were never cool to me. Like, seeing somebody like The Rock and the Nation of Domination and fucking DX come out every week, like, yo, that's what got me hooked to wrestling. So shout out to Vince McMahon and his creativeness at WWE to make the Attitude Era what it was. And then like I said, I was hooked from there. But I think I got put on the TNA by one of my friends in like the second or third grade. They told me to watch TNA, because we would always talk about wrestling, and they told me to watch this one show called TNA. They got Jeff Hardy and all these other guys on there. I was like, Jeff Hardy's on there. So I went over there to go watch, and sure enough, Jeff Hardy was on there, because this is around the time he wasn't with WWE no more. and Jeff Hardy was over there. I believe Christian was not Christian wasn't over there yet. Christian went over there like 05, 06. So yeah, it was just Jeff Hardy at that time, and then I started watching. I was like, yo, hey, this shit kind of lit, bro. Hold on, bro. And I started watching. So now I had three wrestling shows. I had Monday Night Raw, TNA on Thursdays. TNA, I think TNA was on Thursdays. I believe it was on Wednesdays at one point. Because SmackDown didn't move to Fridays until like 04, I want to say. 04? Yeah, SmackDown didn't move to Fridays till like 04, 05. I want to say 05 is when they moved to Fridays. And I think TNA was on Thursdays, because I don't think they was trying to compete with SmackDown or Raw at that point. They was just trying to do their own thing. They was trying to have their own day. And I remember watching, I don't remember, bro, but I was watching them shit still, like around like 3rd grade, bro, watching TNA. And then like 09, when I started high school and Hulk Hogan was coming in, and they was like, oh, we're gonna compete with Monday Night Raw. I already knew this was gonna be a bad idea, but I was like, you never know. They may have some good stories until I gave them a chance. They was just doing WCW all over again, so I already saw the writing on the wall. So I just said, fuck it, let me go back over here, because this shit about to get canceled, and Vince McMahon is gonna end up buying it, like he did WCW. And then WWE's gonna have a full fucking monopoly on the goddamn wrestling scene. But it is what it is, though. But yeah, man, that's just gonna about do it for this one, man. I will see you all in the next one, man. Most definitely, man. The good old days of TNA were ruined by Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, without a doubt. But anyway, so that's just gonna about do it for this one. I'll see y'all next video. Till then, peace out.
Tomorrow night, Cleveland, SummerSlam. You want a Bloodline Rules match? It's probably not the smart